Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we're returning to the subject of KVMs, Gl.iNet KVMs to be more precise. 2025 was a bumper year for this brand, rocking out a whole bunch of KVM solutions. Basically things for whether you are an IT tech or just someone looking for something domestically available to allow you to remote access a PC, a TV, a sodding server, whatever it is that you want to use. These are becoming desirable and very, very affordable. And Gl.iNet's expanded range has meant there's certain overlaps in their portfolio. Now, this is the Comet Pro. I did a review of this. I actually done about technically three videos on this device last year. It knocks around right now. It's finished crowdfunding. It's fully available for around $179. Now, this device is the Comet 5G, newly revealed and going to be available by the end of Q1 2025. And this is this device with some extra bells and whistles, but currently going through early purchase and then going into pre-orders. It's available for around $219 to $239. That is, depending on where you're shopping around, it's about $35 to $50 difference between these two devices depending on where you shop. Now, this is not a review of the Comet 5G because these are so similar that pretty much everything I've said about this device applies to this. This video is about comparing them, whether it is that you originally backed the Comet Pro project and you're wondering, did you jump the gun too early? Maybe you've just purchased the Pro and you're getting buyer's remorse, or right now both are available and you don't know which best suits your needs. That's what this video is about. But regardless of which one of these two devices you purchase, you are getting hold of a remote access KVM that can be connected either via the network or remotely via the internet, utilizing their own relay service or support of things like Tailscale, but they have upgraded that to include Zerotier as well. Both of them arrive with a quad-core A53 ARM Cortex processor and 1 gig of DDR3L memory that can't be upgraded, soldered to the board. We all talk about differences between them, but at least for now we'll talk about similarities. They both arrive with dual HDMI 4K 30 frames per second outputs, and that's 1080p at 60 frames, and that's HDMI in and out. The same goes for audio. It's two-way audio support as well. Neither one of them arrive with an internal battery. They both require a USB power input, ideally powered not from the client device you're connecting it to, because then if there's a forced shutdown, if there's, the system is having difficulty getting out of BIOS, that can be problematic. They both arrive with KVM USB output there, which allows you to then assume control of the connected device. They've also both got touchscreen LCDs there on the front. So again, very similar targeted design. Neither one of them have active fans. They both rely on passive ventilation all the way through the device. They're really, really similar. But what about that 35 to 50 quid difference? Where is that going exactly? Well, the big headline goes into number one, a SIM card slot. This device here not only takes advantage of gigabit networking there, again, non-PoE, that goes for both of them, but this also arrives with the ability to add a local SIM card. That allows this to not be bound by the network it's connected to. So if you utilize this either on the go or you're setting up from a job and moving remotely, this will ensure that any network or VLAN or barriers that have been created between different subnet IP groups and more isn't a problem, because this will allow direct cellular access via your dedicated means there. Next up, and we'll talk about this more during the software, this allows you to not only connect to this device via the LAN and taking advantage of Wi-Fi 6 connectivity, again, both of them have that, but this allows you to create a central single IP, ultimately turning this into a hotspot. This allows you to ensure that this device is completely severed from the rest of the network. So much like the 5G slot that allows you to get into this outside of the standard network, this allows you to mount and deploy this device connected to a PC, but not just use the existing wired or wireless network. Have this as an AP and then tap in directly to it rather than via the network. This is different to the SIM card slot here. This is local point-to-point air-gapped networking access. Next up, that LCD. Both of them have got that touchscreen as mentioned earlier on, but it is a larger screen on the newer device there, the 5G. The newer device has a screen size of 3.69 inches, whereas the Pro has got 2.22 inches. Now, how does that work out in the grand scheme of things? Well, Early doors, when you set these devices up, you can actually mirror and show the device that you are KVMing into via that screen. And regardless of the larger screen there on the Comet 5G, you don't really get to enjoy that because obviously the resolution you're using will be reflected. Now, if you use particularly wide resolution, you might be able to take advantage of more than that. But ultimately, I saw mere millimeters of difference when accessing two systems using 16:9 resolution there. Now, when I access the device's general control panel, that is where there is a difference, because the general control panel on these, having that extra space on the Comet 5G, although it's not really going to pay dividends now, it may pay dividends later on as they scale up the features and services supported by these devices and the more menu options become available. It is just generally a larger screen with more space, and right now at the time of recording, you're not really going to feel those benefits, but there is the potential benefits of that larger screen to play with as they scale up the menus and the services later on. And finally, in terms of internal storage, the Comet Pro arrives with 32 gig of internal NAND storage, but there is 64 gig in the 5G. Now, the 5G device, that extra storage is predominantly going to be utilized for things like ISOs and recovery disks that you may load into it long term, or just upload on the fly when you need to. You can make that storage locally accessible on the PC it's connected to, and I'll go through that later on in the software, but both of them are using pretty much the same standard of NAND, so almost certainly the performance is going to be near enough identical. Really, on the other side of things, if you're considering the Pro is lighter and smaller. There's a difference of around 115, 110 grams. It's 285 grams for the 5G. I think it was 160, 170 grams on the Pro, but between the two of them, neither of these is really going to fit in your pocket. They're more bag-sized. And obviously the antennae, the movable antennae on this are not unlike we've seen Gl.iNet routers, but I would argue, although this is taking advantage of Wi-Fi 6, the kind of distance and the deployment methodology here, these antennae are not functionally useless, certainly not. They're definitely going to do an AE job, but I would argue just how much anyone's going to be taking advantage of that level of enhanced, larger, controllable bandwidth on the Wi-Fi there. And of course, in the AP mode, having them there is going to be useful in terms of directional control and just larger scale coverage. But again, just what kind of distances are we talking about here? Really, when I first saw this device, what I was looking forward to, and maybe one day down the road, I would like to see a merge of these. I would like to see a KVM device that can be cross-used as a travel router. Migrate these two services together in one bumper device, then trust me, I will open my wallet and gladly. But at the very least, you've got these antennae for the local AP, and I understand they'd be needed, and maybe if you don't want to use them, you can hide them away, but still, I'm not saying that those antennae are much worth it for the extra price that you're going to be spending. But let's talk about the software capabilities of these devices. Is there any really meaningful difference between the Pro and the 5G in terms of day-to-day utility? Let's hop over to the PC. Right, so here on my Windows PC, I've got the Gl.iNet KVM Windows application here booted up with both the Pro and the 5G device all set up, good to go on the local area network. On top of that, it is worth highlighting you can access it utilizing the mobile application. Maybe I'll splice some footage in later on, but for reasons you'll see later on, it's a lot harder to show that side by side on screen and narrate it over there, but I'll try and insert some of that footage later on. But at least for now, when you do use this application, again, you can factor in your two-factor authentication, you can factor in passkey there directly onto the KVMs themselves, and each of the individual remote access to KVM devices can actually have a secondary password barrier as well. So if you click on those, you can see them. I've got them set up here on screen here via the web browser. If I go ahead and just enter the password for each, this will allow me to access both of these KVMs side by side and allow it to show you a lot easier. Again, I could have used the application itself and just gone through either one of these with the Pro on the left here and then finally onto the 5G, but it just makes it more complicated to sort of show things side by side, but I will be coming back to that application later on there. So pretty much both of these devices are running the same software with a few hardware differences. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, on the Pro on the left-hand side, we can see that we're running version 1.8 release 4. That's an official release, whereas on the 5G, it's still being utilized in beta form. It's largely the same software. I will say I can see almost no distinction, and the distinctions that are there are very much about the hardware itself. But as we've seen already in our reviews of this software, this KVM application, there's a lot to play with here. Everything from, you know, managing the different video interface there and the streaming quality that you want to take advantage of there. Again, the audio in and out is manageable. There is no, from what I could see, inbuilt speaker into each of the KVMs. And there's just pretty much everything you're looking for in terms of managing your KVM remotely into this web browser interface. And again, if you do set up access to the cloud service, it does allow you to then use the remote relay service to access the KVM. But you might not want to do that and manage this directly via a local network interface there. But I will say, if you're more interested in remote access and you're not sure about using Gl.iNet services, in the version 18 update, they have now integrated not only Tailscale that was there before, but now you can integrate Zerotier as well for peer-to-peer connectivity, which is nice to see. And again, we mentioned before in our original review of the Pro, the fact that there was only Tailscale and not much room for custom stuff there, it's good to see. Now, if we scroll to the bottom, we can see, and this is the other reason we're using the web browser, because it allows us to zoom in a lot easier. We're able to see another main distinction there. Unsurprisingly, it is the utility of Cellular on the 5G, the whole kit and caboodle, the whole reason it exists. So obviously, not having a SIM slot on the Pro, you're not going to have that option, but that's not really the only thing. So for example, with the cell phone, you can see that we've set up that cellular connection and I've got that working there in the background, but I don't really see any failover there. I was really hoping to see some failover configuration options like I've seen in a number of the router devices from this brand. But one thing I did also notice, if you click on the Wi-Fi connection there, we're able to see Wi-Fi config there and changing it, but on the Wi-Fi config on the 5G, we've got the option of that AP mode. Now, this is really, really important because this is effectively walling you off pure point-to-point local if you choose to, effectively air-gapping the surrounding network. So just because you have this thing mounted doesn't mean, and if this doesn't have remote access, that anyone can get in. This effectively turns the Comet 5G into its own hotspot that then you can hop into and really create a centralized local architecture there. That's something you can't do at this time from what I could see on the Pro. I don't know if this is something you can really update into because it feels like that's kind of hardwired into the antennae, but I don't know enough about these things to know. Next up, we'll look at hotkeys and copy and paste shortcuts there. It's largely the same between both of these devices. Same options for shortcuts, the option for Wake on LAN devices there being added on the local area network. Let's try a text length test because I know some KVMs have difficulty with a larger range of text. I've got a best man speech here. A friend of mine gave to his brother at his brother's wedding. Let's copy and paste that in there. I think there's like 7,000 characters. Now on both of these, let's open up the respective document and start pasting that in. Interestingly, let's get that up, get that pasted in there. Have a little look at the length, minimize that. Between the two of them, how many characters are we looking at here? Well, it's 8,795, including spaces. I think spacing is probably going to be a problem here because I'm using LibreOffice, which does have a tendency to dick around with spacing. But let's have a little look down here. It's kind of weird watching it being typed out in this fashion, by the way, this weird kind of typist way rather than copy paste. But at the very least, it's putting that text in for there for us live rather than a straightforward in out. It is, of course, a clipboard shortcut, so presumably it's not treated the same as a shortcut key there, but still nonetheless it's nice to have that going in. Let's have a little look. 8,626 characters there. Let's highlight that. So again, the spacing wise problematic, but at the very least we're still seeing 8,600 characters copy and pasted over there. But again, things like that typo there, don't argue there. Let's find out if those are just errors that he made, but am I seeing those there? Doesn't look like it, so I think we're still seeing the odd little gap there. We're not seeing those same typos in the original document. That said, the 5G device doesn't have any typos. I've gone through it there, and none of the omissions that were featured in this one during this copy and paste don't seem to have been present. Now, you know, we could say it's Notepad. I don't think it is. There is definitely something of a difference there in terms of just the frequency of that text going over than how often it was registered, because there is a litany of issues with regards to spacing as well. So definitely the 5G has taken an edge on that one. It is definitely something to bear in mind. Now, both of these KVMs do support the utility of some of the USB accessories, such as that fingerpop device, and I don't know if Gl.iNet's going to work on any additional products. I know they've got that ATX board for you to use inside a tower case, but that's really, there's not much to compare against the Pro and the 5G at the time on this one. But I do want to talk a little bit there about the storage, because as you can see right now, the Pro arrives with 26.82 gigabytes, basically 32 gig, whereas the 5G arrives with 64 gig, listed as 55.94 gigabytes there. Now, both of them arrive with that ability, by the way, to turn that not only into storage for you to loading ISOs into for your boot menu, your BIOS and such, but it also allows you to create them as remote storage. Now, I want to test the speed of these, but as you're about to see, we've got something of a problem. If I go into the download section, we've got a TrueNAS scale ISO there. I'm just going to drop that into that one, and the first thing you're going to spot is the speed there. It's hitting 23, 26, 18 megs. It's not fantastic. It simply isn't. And this is one of the things that's been covered in other videos about the storage speed, the eMMC inside of the NAND flash that's being utilized. The speeds you're hitting inside there generally sits around 25 to 35, 36 megabytes per second peak. I'm just going to cancel that there, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. Let's drag that over, and we'll do exactly the same thing again, this time on the 5G, because it's got that larger storage capacity. And as you can see, despite that larger storage capacity, we're still seeing that same speed. Again, we could have loaded more files in there, it won't make a huge amount of difference. But what I think is intriguing, rather than looking at this speed, because we're although this is slightly faster than that first generation Comet system and then the later upgraded Comet PoE, what I do want to highlight, if we come out of that, is the internal performance speed. It is the same, right? And remember, we've got the network on there. What'll be interesting to see is if we go ahead and remote mount that storage. So what we're doing here is we're now making that storage internally accessible within the PC. What does that mean in real terms? Let's get rid of this menu here. It means that on both of these respective PCs, we're now going to be able, let's open that in there, open up into a new window. We've now got the Jet KVM listed as available storage. We're going to pop that into its own separate window there. And then we're going to go in back to where the original storage was. We're going to do exactly the same thing here on the other system. So we've got some storage there. As you can see, we've now got our Jet KVM storage. Open up in a new window. Got that there. And now we're going to look at the performance speed here. So for example, if we go ahead and just copy all of that data, we paste it in, we'll be able to get a decent little idea of just what the speed is going to be internally. Actually, there's too much storage, so I've gone for very big files there. Let's go ahead and have a look at that speed. Are we going to get the same thing in terms of read and write? Again, pretty much the same thing, give or take 5 megs. If we repeat the same process on the other side, just going to go and copy and paste that in, bring that down, have a little closer look. And again, we're sort of seeing that same speed in both in terms of read and write there across the two and where we're uploading it onto. And once we copy that over, we're going to copy that back over to each of the respective PCs. But again, not a huge amount of performance to write home about between the two of them. Nothing really to get excited about, but still it's nice they've included that storage at the very least. Carrying on the subject of storage though, you may not be aware that in a recent update to the Gl.iNet KVM software, this is available for both of them, by the way. Not only are you now stuck with just the storage, it arrives with that 32 or 64 gig, but now if you connect a USB drive into one of those USB type A ports, you can now add further storage. Now, this comes with several caveats. So as you can see from there on screen, I've got external drives. Let's go ahead on the left-hand side. I'm just going to go ahead and add this new drive here. First thing you'll see is it requires the device to reboot. And in some cases, it actually requires the system to format the drive if it's the wrong format. Now, I don't know how much that's going to open up over time, but I will say that is something of an inconvenience. The other thing, there is no means to format the drive in its entirety here. What I mean is on the right hand side of the screen, I've connected a USB drive that happened to have an ISO. It'd already been image ready for another installation. I would like to be able to format that drive without transferring over to it. So as you can see, there are several different partitions on the USB drive I've connected there, which is kind of inconvenient. It would have been nice to sort of bolt those together rather than only be able to see the partitions and only be able to format within the partitions on that USB drive. And this applies to both of them, by the way. There's no advantage being given here to the Pro over the 5G. It just happens to be two different USB drives I'm accessing remotely here. But once you do format that drive, or at least use the USB drive for the correct format that it can see, then you've now got access to that drive being the internal storage drive that you're working to and from. So if you do want to use a larger drive in that USB for larger ISOs or a larger collection of ISOs that you keep on your person, that you connect ad hoc to different KVMs and then make that the storage that you're going to work from rather than that base 32 or 64 gig, you've got that option. But here is our second caveat. I tried multiple different USB drives and not all of them worked. And although I can't quite nail down what the problem is now, I would probably say the issue is that you've only got a USB 2 port, and USB 2 does not deliver much power. And modern external USB drives, because they're using better M2 drives inside, but also the controllers, the power draw on a lot of these USB drives are actually a little higher than they were many, many years ago with USB 2 externals. So unless you're going to use a USB drive that's got a guaranteed external power source, or you're going to be using a USB drive where the USB power draw is very low, such as standard USB keys, you might hit issues. The third thing, you might be thinking, oh, cool, wow, if I use another drive, I might get higher performance than that 25 to 35, 36 megabytes per second internal storage. I'm afraid that's not going to be the case because of USB 2. USB 2, you're not really going to be looking at much higher than that. And given this is still passing through the system internals, any real meaningful benefits you're going to get is going to be pretty darn small because of USB 2, but also from what I perceive to be those lower power drawing USBs. So no real advantage one to the other here. This is more about feedback and criticism of the way it's being handled. There is room for improvement. Certainly, if I could just format some of these partitions on this external drive, it would be great. And just keep in mind, it will reboot, and there's every possibility that you are going to format that drive unless it's the right format to start with. So if you're going with a drive full of nice handy ISOs, make sure it's in the right format. FAT32, exFAT, that kind of stuff. Don't fuck around. Now, accessing either of these devices via the mobile application, again, is going to be largely the same experience. I'll leave both of the KVMs there on the desktop there on the side. But again, via the mobile application connected with the account or just on the local area network, you can go ahead and find out more information about updates and that kind of stuff and going through and just adding KVMs. So if we go into the first one there at the top, we have to enter our password. And once we've done that, what will happen is that it will need to be rotated over to landscape mode. And then from there, you've got a lot of the same options. Obviously, cramming down a lot of KVM, speak to things like TeamViewer, you know there's going to be difficulties relaying this on a screen long term. You've got access to a keyboard, access to creating those shortcuts. It's a little bit more simplified there. And obviously, you've got the option to add a system keyboard and use your own local phone keyboard if you choose to. Some of the tools you can go ahead with, whether you want to use touch mode or cursor mode, is all pretty darn good. The level of control is actually pretty impressive there, what you can and can't do. And if you do have a local Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, you can actually connect them to this to get a lot of that job done. And again, if you want to use cursor mode, so you're actually controlling the cursor, or you want to go ahead and use standard touchscreen mode, those options are available for both of these VMs we're accessing via the mobile application. And again, although it's nowhere near as detailed in level of control as we've seen already, at the very least we've still got access to a lot of these bells and whistles and features if we need them to really make the most of this. But again, utilizing that difference between cursor mode and touchscreen mode, it's not great, but it's still, the options are there to get stuff done. Accessing the other VM, we can see straight away exactly the same thing. It's going to be largely the same experience between both of these devices. Really, the only difference being is going to be really how you're accessing it via those local networks, whether you're going to be using the Wi-Fi connectivity there. And I will say, because I'm accessing this on a mobile phone, the level of access I've got on a different local area network, we can already see a huge distinction and difference there in terms of visual quality. But at the very least, it's nice to know that I've got the option to access a lot of the bells and whistles here if I need them via the mobile application. It's still not going to be as good, and certainly, and as I'm accessing this on cellular, we're already starting to see some issues there with regards to the level of control and what I'm doing, because as you can hopefully see in the background of the screen, the local access VM is doing a great job, but my cellular accessed one, less so there. Ultimately, between the two of them, I like what I'm seeing, and I'm glad I've got this tool, but I'm going to say that the mobile appliance probably needs a little bit more finesse, at least in terms of fluidity and latency, than we're seeing there, or at least in terms of compression, than we're seeing on the desktop appliance. Still really nice that we've got this level of access and control and what we can do, and all of that being built into a mobile. Got to respect that. Now, I'm accessing both of these devices on different networks right now, although they're both coming from on the Zero. Trust me, they're on slightly bridged parts of my system for two different PCs. One of them is just a quick formatted PC that was a dupe of an existing one there on the right. But if I go in and just run a quick test here in the background, just to give you some idea about these running visual stuff here on screen. Again, we're accessing this via the web browser, so this isn't the best way to view these. But unfortunately, if I was going ahead and trying to use that Gl.i application, as you can see now, it's had to refresh. I'll kill those off. If I was to access it via that application, I wouldn't be able to do the side-by-side comparison you're seeing here. Ultimately, between the two of them, because they've got exactly the same CPU and exactly the same amount of memory, you're not really going to see much difference. Really, any difference you're going to see is going to come down to whether you're using a wired connection, whether you're using a Wi-Fi connection, whether you're using that AP mode. Again, both of the PCs you're looking at here have got very, very different hardware spec. The one on the left is significantly more powerful. It's a Minis Forum, I think, MS-S1 Max. So this has already got a much higher graphical capability than the Intel Core on the right-hand side, using 1.2 gigahertz integrated graphics, I believe. So ignore the frame rate, because that's why we've got, you can see at the bottom of the screen, the limitation is not the KVM, the limitation is the PC that I'm accessing there. I'm only utilizing this to give you some idea about the visualization that you can run there and how much the PC overhead is going to be playing a part in that. But either between the two of them, you're going to have the same KVM experience. And because Gl.iNet is almost certainly going to be rolling out further updates to this software within this ecosystem, they're going to maintain a level of parity that, unless it's behind a hardware wall, like that eSIM, like the Wi-Fi hotspot, that AP mode, you're going to have the same experience with either one of these two devices there. Ultimately, it really comes down to your own deployment there. The Comet Pro is a good KVM, and they're continuing to roll out development and software updates on that platform, and they're not going to abandon it. They're definitely going to maintain this whole level and portfolio that they've got there. But the 5G there is definitely the more feature rich, and by more, that is relative to the hardware. It really comes down to if you want that closed extra level of failover, which hopefully they'll integrate into the software in a much more controllable fashion. Between the two of them, if you can budget it, I'd recommend the Comet 5G. The screen is slightly larger, and although it's not really reflected in when you're accessing the live feed, I think the difference we worked out there was literally millimeters of difference. The actual interface and the full screen itself is a great deal better outside of accessing that screen cloning software there. And later on down the line, as more features get added by Gl.iNet into these KVMs, I think that larger screen might pay dividends, and maybe a little bit more customization of what it can do and the level of control. But if you can't spring for the extra, or you are just looking for a strong, reliable KVM, either one of these two devices will suffice. And if you already got the Comet Pro, either at retail or via the crowdfunding, you're not missing out. It's still a solid product, and both of them are going to maintain and get those updates. Either way, Gl.i, do not abandon the software updates on these. Keep it going, because they're both great devices, I think. But let me know what you guys think. I've put links in the description to both of these products. So if 1, you found this video helpful, and 2, you want to support what we do, and 3, you were going to shop at Amazon or Gl.iNet's own store, use the links in the description to get your product. Doing so results in a small commission coming here to Nas Compares, and allows me and Eddie to keep doing what we do. The guides, the reviews, all the stuff on the website, all of the YouTube videos, the free advice forum, the free support, all of that. It keeps the lights on. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.